Hi, everyone. It's Lin Bouthillier from linbouthillier.com. I'm a certified trauma recovery coach, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of my ongoing series entitled Monogamous at 13. This is my ongoing video discussions of my life, my trauma in particular, from two perspectives. One as the trauma survivor, and one as a mental health professional who is an expert on trauma. All certified trauma recovery coaches are experts on trauma, and they understand that there are various forms of trauma. They understand what they're called, what are the after effects from each of these types of trauma, and what kind of mark does that leave on a person's life, their emotions, their psychology, their relationships, their biology, and their neurobiology. All these different ways that trauma can affect us is the things that trauma professionals speak about. So because I love humanity and I love myself, I'm a trauma survivor. I've committed the rest of my life to helping people who are trauma survivors and abuse survivors. And all abuse is traumatic, but not all trauma comes from abuse. So I have a grounding tool in my hand, my little holy stone, my little grounding stone is here. And this is an episode where I really need mine. And I strongly encourage you to understand that there is a trigger warning on this video because it's a highly sensitive subject that could be triggering for just about anyone. But it is something that really does need to be discussed in our world because that topic is the topic of suicide. And I don't speak about this very often for the very reason that I don't want people to be triggered into an autonomic nervous system response to trauma, such as fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or any combinations of those, or into dissociation, or into an emotional flashback, or emotional dysregulation, because we don't feel safe when those things are happening. So if you're not familiar with how to bring yourself into a state of anchored and groundedness, you can watch in the video feed for my channel, videos that I've created. Special episode number 57 the title is How to Prevent and Handle Triggers. And this is the video that I made to help people so that they can become anchored and grounded, learn how to become anchored and grounded during their trauma recovery work so that they can get the most benefit out of it and feel safe at the same time, to not have those intrusive things occurring because we become so used to them. As a trauma survivor, it's just our new way of life is to be quite frequently dealing with all of those things, triggers and that sort of stuff. So if you have not brought yourself into a state of anchored and groundedness, now would be the best time to do so. Pause the video and then come back to the video when you feel that you have met your system's needs and you are prepared. If you feel already that this is just going to be too triggering for you and it's going to bring up all kinds of experiences and memories, please shut off the video. Leave it for someone else if it's not for you, because I don't want you to have anything happen to you that could cause you to feel unsafe or to be re-traumatized. Okay, so I'm not going to describe graphic incidents of trauma, graphic incidents of suicide, of finding someone who had suicided, or different ways a person can plan a suicide. That is not the focus of this video. The topic today related to suicide is why people commit suicide and the misunderstandings that are out in the world when someone does or when someone attempts a suicide. There are responses from people in the world that are based in a false premise. It means they're not well informed. They don't know the truth about suicide or what am I trying to say? The dynamics of suicide and people who are in that state of mind and emotion when they attempt to or they complete a suicide. So this is to clear up some understandings, because what does trauma recovery come through? It comes through small pieces of accurate, healthy, reliable information. And this is not for in any way to judge any person unfairly, whether they have committed suicide, attempted suicide, thought about suicide, or if they have responded in any way whatsoever to someone else's thoughts, attempts, or completion, plans to suicide, or if they did actually suicide out. So one of the things that I can assure you in this video is that I speak on this topic very thoughtfully and trying my hardest not to cause people to be injured. I want people to feel seen, heard, understood, cared about, and that I hold heart space and compassion for them. And sometimes I'm a human being. If I misstep, if I say something that is offensive to any of my viewers or listeners, I want you to understand that I would not harm you for anything in the world. If I say something that is insensitive, it's because I'm a human being and I make mistakes. But I would never intentionally mislead or harm anyone, especially on something as serious and important as the topic of suicide. So if you are ready and you've met your system's needs, you are properly anchored and grounded, and all that means is just having brought yourself into a state of calm and being conscious that you're paying attention and being with yourself. You're present with yourself right now, and you're going to notice anything that comes up for you that is starting to change you and make you feel dysregulated. That's the moment where we step away, shut it off, step away, go into highest, best self-care, meet our system's needs, and lavish as much care and attention on ourselves as we need to in a healthy way with healthy things, nourishing things, and to bring ourselves into a state of knowing that we are our own highest priority. My wellness is my highest priority. I care how I feel, and I take care of my system. So with that, I'll begin. I'm going to first disclose that I have had a couple times in my life where I had suicidal ideation, and I have never actually taken steps to end my life except for one time when I was a teenager. I went way out behind my parents' property. They lived on about 1 acre of land, but it was in a farm community and it was surrounded by farmland. And I went way out into the back fields in the middle of winter. It was really, really snowy and cold out, and I went way out there. And my plan was, because I had been punished for something I didn't do. I just recently made a video about that. What does it feel like? What does it do to us? How traumatizing is it when we get punished for something we did not do? Well, I assure you, it is an extremely distressing thing when we get blamed or punished for something we did not do. And that's what happened to me. That was the catalyst for me going into that depth of despair, where I felt that the only way to get all of this to stop was to just leave this dimension. But the way that I had done it was it wasn't planned ahead. It was a completely impulsive thing that happened. And my pain threshold, we were way past my ability to cope with the amount of pain that was being inflicted on me, because I was being toxic shamed by a parent, and I had been toxic shamed at school, and I had been with my boyfriend when the incident happened. I was being accused of smoking in the school, and I didn't. And so I never had my first cigarette until after I was out of high school, and I was well past age 18 when it happened. But this day, it was more than my system could handle. And I went home, and my mother was waiting for me because she had received the phone call from the school that I had been caught smoking in the auditorium before homeroom, but I was not. I was in there, but I was not there for smoking. I was there for something completely different that I won't get into now. That's a completely different trauma that I've made videos about. But so I knew that she was just, I hate the expression, but loaded for bear when I got home. And she laid into me immediately. And she just wouldn't let up. And she would not stop talking about what a horrible person I am. What a liar. What a despicable person. That her life would be so much better if she didn't have to constantly recover from the things that I was doing. Well, that was all exaggeration. But it was so completely eviscerating and harmful. And I was just going into a horrific shame spiral. And I just felt like I'm caught in that current, and I can't get my nose above water in this situation. I cannot get this to stop. And when she finally let go of me, the parting words were, "You make me sick. You make me sick to my stomach. You disgust me. I can't stand the sight of you. Get out of my sight." And that was when I said, "You want to know something? Yeah, I am going to get out of your sight. Yeah, I sure am." I got to pause for 1 second. All right. So I figured, you want it, lady? You've got it. You want to find out how out of sight I am? The last words that you said to me are going to ring in your ears for a very, very, very long time. I was a junior in high school. I was 16 years old. And when this incident happened, it wasn't, and this I can't stress enough, it wasn't just the incident that had happened that day that had led me to the point of being suicidal. I was a parent, excuse me, I was a child of an alcoholic. I was the child of a covert narcissist. I was the child of a severely codependent woman who also at the same time was what I would refer to as a religious narcissist, believing that she was in a state of living the way that the Lord just loved, and that she had a duty to raise her children in the same religious cult that she was raised in, and that she couldn't be an effective parent unless she was completely shaming her children at all times and showing them, I would never do the terrible things that you do. You're a far lesser person than me because you do these terrible things. But I was raised in such a way I wouldn't dare do anything like this to my parents, but you're despicable because you do these things to your parents, and you do them against God. You're against your parents and you're against God when you do these things. And so therefore, I have no use for you. Because she would literally come out and say, I'm getting black marks on my soul because I'm your parent. You're putting black marks on my soul that are going to get me judged by the Lord someday when I die. And I'm not going down for the things that you do. So if I don't straighten you out, then I've committed a mortal sin, and I don't want to die with mortal sins on my soul because I might not get into heaven because of what you've done. That was her message over and over and over again. Might not have been those exact words, but that's what she was saying. So that's religious narcissism. No doubt about it. When you tell somebody, you're fucking up my ability to get into heaven and you better straighten up and fly right. And I'm taking control of you right now. I'm going to force you to believe, feel, understand, behave, and conduct yourself in a way that you have to behave this way so that I can be in a state of perfection. That's narcissism, no doubt about it. Religious narcissism. So those things were factors, but there was so much more than that. It was every single trauma that I had ever, traumatic experience, traumatic environment, traumatic behavior, traumatic education, traumatic extended family, generational trauma, what we call intergenerational trauma, medical trauma, severe medical trauma that I had up until that point. And having attachment trauma, developmental trauma, relationship trauma, environmental, meaning there was, at times, there was insufficiency in the cleanliness of the home. There was insufficiency in the structure of the home. The home was overcrowded, and there was almost a complete and total lack of privacy. And it just was a very, very, very difficult way to live. And there was also environmental trauma from there being a farm where we were expected at young age to witness things that children really shouldn't be seeing on a farm. And I won't get into the details of that now, but things that are done with animal husbandry, that children are in processing of animals for food consumption, that children should not be forced to be present for. And so when I became suicidal, that was the day with my mother and the school principal and the whole thing that had happened at school. That was the thing that just tipped the scale over into the realm of Lin cannot cope. She doesn't have a support system. She's being abused at school on a daily basis, and she's severely trauma bonded to her boyfriend, who she does not recognize as her abuser. She recognizes him as her boyfriend, but she's being abused, and she's thoroughly trauma bonded, and you cannot be trauma bonded in a healthy way. There's no such thing as healthy trauma bond. There is only trauma bond that comes from abuse. It happens no other way. And so now we can now picture what's going on with this girl. She's 16 and she's really, really struggling. And then one day the whole thing blows up because she does something and she gets caught and she gets falsely blamed, and it's awful. It's just awful. And she cannot get one single person in her whole world to listen to her side of the story. She cannot get support for the trauma and the abuse she experiences at home. Her father's abusive and he's an alcoholic. Those two things combined, it's just an absolutely difficult thing for any person to cope with. But a girl who's an adolescent who's already experiencing all these other forms of trauma, that was the part where she buckled. Okay. So my first experience with it was I hiked way out behind the house, and I thought, when they find me, I will have died of exposure. I will have frozen to death. And they're going to have to look at this and say, we really shouldn't have done this. It's not unusual at all for a person who is committing suicide to do it, to say, I tried to get your attention. You refused. I begged you to help me. You refused. I did everything I could do. I'm standing on my head 25 different ways trying to get you to understand me, and you refused. So now I feel I've been left with no choice, and now I have to show you this is what happens when you do that to a human being. And it wasn't, I can't say that I was thinking revenge. I just want revenge on her. No, I was thinking more along the lines of cause and effect. If you do this and you do it long enough, this is what will happen. And I don't mind at all that you're going to have a moment where somebody finds me, brings this to the attention that you don't have daughter number 4 anymore. She's gone. And there's nothing you can do to bring her back. And a whole lot of crying and saying, well, now I'm sorry. Now I feel bad about what I've done to you. That's what it would have had to take. And I knew that. It would have taken having to leave this dimension in order for her to pause for a minute and think about her behavior and how absolutely inappropriate it was, because she was missing all the signs of a teenage child that was in trouble. And I mean serious trouble. And so what I did was I laid down in a snowdrift, and I was just waiting for the feeling that I'm leaving my body to begin. And I knew it wasn't going to happen right away. It would take time for my core temperature to come down. I knew that. And I just figured it's going to be dark shortly, and I'm just going to be laying here, and just the sounds of the woods behind me, the sound of the snow blowing, the sound of my own heartbeat, The sound of my breathing getting slower is what's going to usher me out of this world. And I was so ready for that. And many of you who have been experiencers of an attempt of suicide will recognize that the sound of somebody calling your name is devastating, because they just interrupted what you were doing. You were bringing yourself relief from your pain, and well, what happened to me is I was gone too long. People started to panic, and they tracked my footprints in the snow right to where I was. And so I was found, and I was angry, and I was humiliated, and I was upset. And I did not get compassion. I did not get care from her. She never said the word suicide. She never made any reference to what happened between us, bringing me to that point. On the driveway, just before we went in the house, she said, well, you haven't eaten, and you should probably go clean yourself up. And I love you. And it was just that emotionless. And I love you. And she just turned and went in the house. Now, before that day ever arrived, long before that day, anytime suicide came up, because she had teenage kids, the topic comes up, and there was stuff on the news, things in the community. And anytime the topic of suicide came up, she would make a big production out of gathering her kids in close and saying, now I want you all to understand this. If you ever think about doing that, if you ever think about ending your life, I want you to understand right now that suicide is two things. It's a sin and it's a crime. And she said, if you ever do something to attempt to suicide, but it gets stopped, you're going to be arrested. They're going to put handcuffs on you. They're going to put you in a police car, and they're going to take you to jail, because it's illegal. It's a crime to attempt to commit suicide. And she said, if you ever commit that crime and you get arrested for it, you will not be let back into this house or this family, because we don't house criminals here. Just the same way you can't use drugs. And if I ever find, she used to say this exactly, if I ever find a marijuana cigarette in your purse or in your room or in your, in your dress or anything like that, in your coat pocket, if I ever find a marijuana cigarette, I'm the first person who's going to call the Erie County Sheriff and have them come right away and put you under arrest, take you out of here, and you're going to jail, and you are never going to live with us again. You will be completely cut off from this family. Do I make myself clear? That is what we were told would happen to us again and again and again and again and again. And so there was a companion story to that, which was, if you ever dare to commit suicide and you don't go all the way through with it and you're still alive, same thing's going to happen. It's going to be reported to the police. Let's say, for instance, you do it out in the world somewhere. Somebody finds you trying to do that. They're going to call the police. And as soon as the police come, they're going to arrest you, put the handcuffs on you, put you in the police car, and take you to prison, because it's illegal to commit suicide. And she said, people will think you are a horrible person because there are police and emergency workers in the world, and they work every single day for good people to keep them safe, to get people who need an ambulance because they're sick or injured, and they need an ambulance and they need to go to the hospital. But they don't want to waste their time wasting an ambulance for somebody who would commit suicide or attempt suicide. They don't want to use resources like that for people like that do those sort of things. So if you ever do it, that's what those people are going to be thinking about you. How dare you waste our resources when there are legitimately ill people who need our care and need our time and our attention? That's what she was telling us. She's programming unworthiness and unbelievable amounts of toxic shame into her children. Well, what happened was I walked out, I walked that walk way out there to the field on the edge of a woods and laid down in a snowdrift, knowing that my mother felt that way about any human being who does that, is that you're not even worth the care of the people who would help you if you did survive it. And that you would just be a disgrace and a drain on society, because those resources are for the people who are deserving of it, not the people who are unworthy because of their selfishness and their stupidity. That's what we were being taught as children when they pause for a drink. So that's what I was lying there thinking about. Hope this goes through, because I don't want to live with the shame of her disapproval and her disgust for me for even attempting such a thing. And so when she walked with me back to the house, one of the things that I was experiencing was knowing all those words from all those discussions in the past are ringing in my ears. And what is the main emotion that I'm feeling at that time? It's shame. Toxic shame, not healthy shame. There's a difference. Healthy shame is when we have that inner set of guardrails that reminds us we don't do certain things to people. It's not who we are, and it doesn't serve any purpose in this world to do that, which I'm for a split second thought about doing, but I'm not going to do it because my healthy shame is keeping me from doing behaviors that are unacceptable. But toxic shame is when somebody else is telling us, you are bad. You are faulty, bad, broken, shameful, or malfunctioning. You are just bad. You're not enough, or you're too much. Well, my mother was frequently telling me that I was either not enough or that I was too much to handle, too much bother, too much inconvenience, too much embarrassment, too much humiliation, too much shame for her to be able to cope with. And my father as well. And I had siblings that did the exact same thing. It's what they were programmed and downloaded with all through their childhood as well. But there's an article that I pulled up today that illustrates a point that I wanted to make. And it is from medicalnewstoday.com. And the article is entitled, "Why Do People Kill Themselves?" And it's medically reviewed by C.C. Cassell, PsyD, written by Jennifer Hujan on January 15th, 2021. And it does not show any recent updates for this article. So it's listed as possible reasons, risk factors, suicide and mental health, warning signs, talking about it, suicidal thoughts, how to help, for attention, question mark, and summary. Many times the articles that are written about suicide are written by people who have never been suicidal. They can't fully comprehend. And I give this example sometimes with my clients when we're learning about something, or we're writing about something, or speaking about something. We can either speak about it from our experience, or we can speak about it as an informed person who was maybe an observer. But if we're in a driver education course and it's our turn to be behind the wheel and we're driving the car, we're having a firsthand experience of driving a car. But if we're in the back seat waiting for our turn, what happens if we never get a turn? I know this seems silly, but it's just an analogy. What would happen if the whole time, every time we went out for a driving education lesson, we are being educated about driving, but we're never given a turn, not even once, behind the wheel. And then it's time for us to take our road test. So other people in the group were allowed to sit in the driver's seat and control the car and drive the car. But for some reason, I wasn't allowed. I know this, most people would say, well, that doesn't even make sense. Who would ever go along with that? But just for the sake of this discussion, let's just assume that somebody did. And that was me. I never got to sit in the driver's seat, but I've completed the course. And then it's time for me to take my road test. Do I even have a feel for how a car operates? Have I built muscle memory for how and when to brake? How many times to look at an intersection before going, or when pulling out of a parking lot or a driveway? All of these different things I would have witnessed them happening, but I wouldn't have felt them happening because I'm the experiencer who's in the driver's seat. Well, when we have people who write articles and they have never felt, they've never been in the driver's seat for a suicidal ideation, they never actually had a plan and came right to the edge of completing a suicide. How on earth can they convey to other people, particularly trauma survivors, suicide survivors, abuse survivors, what it feels like and why we would do it? There are so many false premises out there that are perpetuated still to this day. And we're going to talk about that a minute after I read this article, because this article makes fantastic points. There's lots of really good information here, but I made a really short list of things that were not in it, not because I want to pick apart the article written by C.C. Cassell. It's not why. It's because I'm trying to gain clarity on suicide. So here we go. Just going to read the article quickly. Suicide refers to when someone harms themselves with the intent to end their life. The reasons that people attempt suicide are varied and complex, but they often involve severe emotional or physical pain that a person finds unbearable. That is true. This information comes from Suicide Awareness Voices of Education, or SAVE, SAVE. It can be difficult for people to understand why someone would want to harm themselves. However, suicide is one of the leading causes of death in the United States, according to the National Institute of Mental Health. It's the NIMH. This article will look at some of the reasons that a person might consider suicide, the link between mental health and suicide, and the role of suicidal thoughts. We'll pause right there. The one big piece of the puzzle is they're not making the connection between trauma and suicide. It's just referred to as mental health and suicide. But suicide is the ultimate maladaptive coping mechanism for trauma. There are many maladaptive coping mechanisms for trauma. Human beings are infinitely creative, and they have come up with hundreds of thousands to millions of ways that a person can unalive theirself. Back into the article now. It will discuss some ways to help someone who is contemplating suicide and some of the support resources available. Why do people consider suicide? Suicide refers to when a person intentionally ends their own life. Sometimes people use the term commit suicide to describe this. However, the word commit implies criminality, which can reinforce harmful stigma. We're right back to what my mother, whom I call Eloise in my videos, Eloise had packed and packed and packed and packed her children full of the idea that suicide is criminality and that you commit it because you're committing a crime. You commit suicide. And it's a crime against God. It's a crime against humanity. It's a crime against the ordinances in the town, city, or municipality where you live. And it means that you are a very, very, very bad person, which is not true. That is a lie. It's a false premise that many of us have heard from the people who raised us. There may be many potential reasons that a person may consider suicide. Often it is the result of long-term difficulties with thoughts, feelings, or experiences that the individual feels that they cannot bear any longer. It is the escape hatch. It's the last resort. Among other things, a person contemplating suicide may feel sadness or grief, shame, worthlessness, intense guilt, rage, or a desire to seek revenge, that they are a burden to others, that they have no worth or value, that life is not worth living, that they are trapped either physically or emotionally, that things will never get better, an intense physical or emotional pain. Well, I'm going to just tell you that every single thing on this list so far of reasons why a person may attempt suicide, every one of those was present when I was 16 and I wanted to end my life because of an incident that had happened that day. But all of the things on this bullet list were present within me. Those were my feelings. Those were my thoughts. Those are my experiences. Every single thing that I just spoke was a factor. Many factors can contribute to a person feeling this way. It may be due to events happening in their life. Mind, a charity in the United Kingdom, lists the following examples of scenarios that may lead to suicide. And it's MIND. It's a charity in the UK. The loss of a loved one, bullying, discrimination, or abuse, the end of a relationship, a major change in life circumstances such as divorce, unemployment, retirement, or homelessness, receiving a diagnosis of a life-changing illness, problems with money, being in prison, pregnancy or pregnancy loss, and I will also add in abortion. A person can be made to feel so ashamed of having an abortion that they would take their own life. And it might not happen right immediately after. They can carry the shame of that abortion for 20, 30, 40, 50 years and then just find it unbearable. And I'm not saying that the answer is to stop having access to abortions. No, what we need to do is stop shaming women for having abortions. It is healthcare. It is healthcare, and it is important. It is necessary. And unless we know somebody's intimate details of their life, we have absolutely no business making assumptions about them. And if we're not walking a mile in their shoes, or 10,000 miles in their shoes, we have no idea the suffering that they're going through or what the circumstances are in their personal life and in their pregnancy. And so abortion, absolutely, women are tortured over that, and it can lead to suicide. Questioning one's sexual or gender identity in an environment that is not accepting of this. I can tell you, as a trauma coach, there are people who have questioning of their gender identity or their sexuality or anything related to their sexual health. Even in an environment where it is supported, it can still be too much for some people because it's still just extremely difficult to trust anyone with such private, intimate information. And we still don't know if someone's going to betray us, even if it seems like a healthy, safe environment to have these discussions. We have no idea who's on the level, whether or not someone is trustworthy, or whether or not they may be 5, 6, 7 years out from the time that you had those discussions with them. Then they might become non-trustworthy and do some backstabbing, some humiliating, some betraying, some triangulating, and some smear campaign. And so we just don't know. But even in the best, healthiest environments, it's still significant risk for human beings, and it impedes their safety, their sense of safety. and legitimately so. Certain cultural practices, such as forced marriage, or a big thing in certain parts of this country is purity pledges. When we have young girls, preteen and teen girls that go to a purity ball with their father, and if their father isn't alive, they might go to it with the person that's their date, could be their brother, their stepdad, their uncle, their grandpa. They have to go to these things where they're pledging to be pleasing. Making this into a girl thing that they just love to go to. Oh, I'm so excited. I'm going to my first purity ball, and I'm getting a beautiful ball gown, or I'm getting a new beautiful dress, or I'm going to go to the salon, and I'm going to be treated like an adult woman. And I get to go to this wonderful gala event. But it's still shaming if I do something that displeases these people who hold this concept. And I'm going to be judged. And what if it comes out that I did not keep my purity pledge at the purity ball? What will happen to me? This could be a reason for a person to feel that there is no hope, no chance of being loved, accepted, appreciated, being seen, being held, someone holding heart space for them, and to be completely integrated into their family if they have done something that the family might consider to be an abomination. And the last one is surviving a traumatic event. However, suicide does have experienced family violence or abuse, such as physical, sexual, or psychological abuse, are in prison, have had a severe or chronic illness, have access to firearms or other weapons. And it says males are more likely to die by suicide than females. However, females are more likely to attempt suicide. Attempted suicides occur when a person tries to end their life but does not die as a result of their actions. This may be due to a difference in preferred methods. According to the NIMH, for example, males are more likely to use lethal methods that are difficult to treat. And by meaning to treat, meaning in the event that it wasn't a successful suicide, you're still alive, and you have been, near mortally wounded. Suicide and mental health. Mental health conditions are a significant risk factor for suicide. SAVE estimates that around 90% of people who die by suicide have a mental health condition. Some examples of conditions that may contribute to suicidal thoughts or intent include substance abuse disorders, depressive disorders, borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, anxiety-based disorders, and psychosis. However, it's important to note that although mental health conditions can increase the risk of suicide, they are also very common. Additionally, according to the UK charity Samaritans, not everyone who considers suicide has a diagnosed mental health condition. I'll point out here, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed, far too many in our communities are assuming when they hear that someone committed suicide that it was because they were mentally ill. There is great attachment to the idea of you must be mentally ill in order to commit suicide. And the average person in a household or out on the street or in your workplace or in your congregation, these people are not informed about suicide. The greatest majority of them are not. And what they do know in their head might not be fact. It might be made up by their own brain. Social isolation, a lack of support, and untreated or mistreated mental health conditions place people at higher risk of suicide, while having appropriate access to healthcare and support lowers the risk. So here's the warning signs. What are the warning signs? Some people exhibit warning signs that they are considering suicide. Safe state, the organization SAVE states that this is important to take notice if someone is talking about wanting to die, talking about feeling trapped, feeling hopeless, or being in unbearable pain, talking about being a burden to others, planning or looking for ways to harm themselves, such as acquiring firearms or other weapons, stocking up on medications, or searching online, withdrawing from family and friends, using drugs and alcohol more often, eating or sleeping more or less than normal, acting in an anxious, agitated, or reckless manner, experiencing severe mood shifts. However, not everybody exhibits these warning signs when they are considering suicide. The best way to find out for certain whether or not someone is considering suicide is to talk to them. Well, the next part is about talking about suicide, but what I'm going to do is leave the article for you to complete on your own if you're interested. The most important thing I can give you here at this point is that there's a National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. The number to that is 1-800-273-8255. That's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. And they also have, you can contact, deaf people can contact Lifeline by dialing 711 or 1-800-273-8255. It's the same number. So there's resource for people in the world who are experiencing either their own suicidality or the suicidality of a loved one. But again, this information, this article can be found at medicalnewstoday.com. And the title of the article is Why Do People Kill Themselves? Okay, so for right now, I'm just going to look at a couple of things that were in my notes that are not mentioned in the article that could be additional reasons. One is severe neglect. They did mention abuse, but a lot of people don't recognize neglect as a form of severe abuse or moderate abuse. But severe neglect can absolutely cause a person not, we don't have to be depressed in order to decide to leave. We can just at one point decide, and I'm not encouraging that anybody ever do this. This is about preventing suicide. I want to be very, very clear about that. This is about preventing people from feeling that that's their only option. But we do that through education and information. And so if we experience severe neglect, that can absolutely be a factor. Humiliation. Now, there were some things that were briefly touched upon, such as the end of a relationship or a severe, some form of trauma happening. And they did mention living with a person who's in addiction or being in addiction ourselves. But humiliation, meaning public humiliation, through what? Triangulation, smear campaign, being doxxed. They did mention bullying, okay? But I'm speaking about online bullying, not just for kids that are on social media. Kids who had an incident at school, they might have got outed for being, LGBTQ, and they could feel just absolute utter humiliation for what's happened to them, and betrayal and shock. And these are horrible things when they happen to a human being. But just that severe toxic shaming. This is, I feel that the articles that are available, although they're, I mean, I do not sit in judgment of articles. I'm simply saying that shame is a giant factor, and we're not hearing enough in the articles that we read about shame. Shame is a binding emotion. Shame is a core emotion. And if someone is toxic shamed, even for something moderately, distressing, the response to it can be enormous. Just gotta take a sip. So it's my substitute for morning coffee. I'm an iced tea drinker, but I'd like to drink weak iced tea. Okay, so the next one is also under humiliation and bullying is when a person is outed. Okay, we have severe toxic shaming that happens to people from being outed, and that is a very, very, very real concern. And then this next one is trauma and abuse survivors being blamed for their own abuse and their own traumatic experiences, and their responses to them by their family, their partner, and or their community. And then the last one that I have on my list is, and I've met a person personally who has experienced this. And her story, she is not a client of mine. This is when I was recovering from my own experience of suicide. And I met an individual who had shared with me her experiences about shunning done in a religious community. It doesn't have to be a religious community, but hers, it was. She was a long-term member of a cult. We know that religion in the United States as just a religion. It's one of the Christian faith religions. But she was a longtime cult survivor, and she'd gotten out, and she shared with me that it is absolutely a cult, and they're doing all of the cult behaviors within the walls of these organizations, the different locations of this one. It's a worldwide church, happens to be very predominant in the United States, and there are lots of different locations, and it is not widely viewed as a cult at all. But to the people who are coming out of it, they can be saying it absolutely is, and people need to know the stuff that goes on. And one of the things that was explained to me in great detail was the process of shunning. And so another thing that is just simply not listed as in the articles that we can find easily, the articles that we look up and we read them, we're not hearing enough about the shunning that goes on inside of religious cults and what happens to people, the harassment and the stalking. And that's another thing, is stalking can lead a person to suicide, but religious stalking, when you say, no, thank you, I'm no longer a card-carrying, dues-paying, tithing member of your cult church, I'm gone. And they can pursue you and go to great lengths to get you back. And this individual was explaining to me how many different times she had felt the gang stalking behaviors of this organization that was saying, you do not have the right to walk away from us. When you made a pledge to become a member, you must have misunderstood. Didn't you recognize that this means until the day that you leave the world in old age? You didn't know that? You have to stay with us forever? Well, we're here to let you know that now. So these are a few other things I just wanted to add to the list that was given in the article. And some of you might say, well, those things were kind of covered under abuse and stuff like that. But I think it's worthwhile to mention them, to name them specifically, because the more specific we can be in the description of what can happen to bring a person into a state of suicidality, the more we can understand them and the more we can offer them resources, the more we can support them, the more we can partner with them to show them your autonomy is real, and every single person on the planet has the inherent right to choose when they're going back to creation. They just simply do. If I had a client who was saying to me, I feel like I need to commit suicide, I would say to them, as a coach, I have an obligation, and I truly want to get you resources right now. I'm required. If I'm your coach and you disclose that to me, I need to go into the escalated care protocol immediately for you, because that's my responsibility as your mental health practitioner. But if a person, and I've not had this experience happen at all, but if a person did, that is exactly what would happen. I would go into the escalated care protocol, which is a whole series of things that need to be done to help that person to get to safety and to receive the level of care that they obviously need for their own health and well-being. But we make so many assumptions about people not having the right to leave. If I'm not somebody's practitioner and they're just some person out in the world that I've never met before, and they decide that today's the day that they're going back to creation, they don't want to be here anymore, and it's too painful, it's too hard, and whatever reason that they have for it is their reason. It's still their right. They still have the right to do that. They're an adult. They have every right to make their own choices. They don't have the right to harm somebody else. They don't have the right to put somebody else at risk. But I will never see these people as faulty, bad, broken, shameful, or malfunctioning. I see them as people who have been traumatized. And I will always hold the trauma-informed perspective on suicidality. And that is that when a human being has reached their threshold for how much they can tolerate being done to them or in their environment, whatever has taken place, if it's too much and they can't go on, we can ask them to stay, and we can let them know that we care, and we can give them every single resource and hold heart space for them all day long. We can do this for years on end, but ultimately it is their decision. And once they have made that decision, this is something that's really hard for me, is that I hear people in my community, and if it's in my community, most likely it's in your community, where when somebody says, one person says to another person in front of them, did you hear what happened? And they say, no, what happened? And they'll say, well, you didn't hear that Lori Ann's son committed suicide? And that other person will say, Cheryl, nobody told me. When did it happen? And they say, yesterday. And the next thing that Cheryl might say is, nobody even knew how mentally ill he was. Nobody had any idea how mentally ill Austin was. This is just all made up scenario. This is not real. I don't know anybody by these names, and I don't know anybody that happened to. But what I'm doing is illustrating for you. I'm making a diagram for you with words. So there's these two women, and they're having this really quick, sudden dialogue where one's informing them that somebody in our community, they're in grief now because their son committed suicide. And after finding out when did it happen, and then, the next question would be, how? What did he do? Uh-huh. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that nobody knew he was so mentally ill. My gosh, if they knew how mentally ill he was, they might have been able to give him some intervention and prevent it from happening. We've got to do so much more about mental illness in our world. That part I did hear in a dialogue one time. It was at my mother's care home, and one of the aides was in my mother's room talking about her niece. And I wasn't a trauma coach when that happened. I'm not speaking about anything that is confidential for anybody. I would never mention names or the location. I'm simply saying that this woman said to me, I'm just kind of floaty. I'm in a fog. I'm in shock because a couple of days ago I found out that my niece committed suicide. And she said, when my sister called me to tell me that her daughter's gone, my niece is gone, she said, I just couldn't stop saying, how could she have been so mentally ill and we never knew? And I asked her, do you mind if I ask you, mentally ill with what? What did you think she could have been mentally ill with that would cause her to commit suicide? And without skipping a beat, she just looked at me and just as seriously as could be, she said, well, she had to be schizophrenic. If she committed suicide, she would have had to be schizophrenic, but the family didn't know. And my question was, what is schizophrenic? And she thought for a minute and she said, well, just not right in the head. That is a terrible, terrible assumption to make. To say that somebody is schizophrenic and just decide it on the spot because you like the word and you think that that means really mentally ill. But to have absolutely no facts to back that up, there's no diagnosis, there's nothing. But that's how extreme people will be in their assumptions when someone has committed suicide, or if they have had one or more attempts at committing suicide and other people find out. Oh my gosh, I never knew they were so mentally ill. Is it mentally ill to have had a sickness or an injury that causes such unbearable, severe pain that there is not medication that controls it for a person anymore? What if the severe chronic pain is in their back? It's so awful that they cannot get into a comfortable position at all. There's no such thing as even 1 minute around the clock. In a 24-hour time period, there is not even 1 minute where the pain can be shut off or reduced to a tolerable level. It's impossible for that person. If they commit suicide, was that mental illness? No. What about the person who lives in a very religious and judgmental community, and the community finds out that this person is a male cross-dresser, and they get outed in the community, and now they're being bombarded and harassed, and things are being thrown at them at their house. They're getting death threats. They're getting all kinds of things happening to them. It's just a total onslaught of cruelty and threat and toxic shaming and disapproval from their entire community. Is that mental illness? Some of you might argue, well, if they're cross-dressing, that's mental illness. And no, it is not. That is not a mental illness. But a lot of people in our communities think that they are the decider of what mental illness is. And I can assure you, they're operating from a false premise. It is absolutely not true. If you do not sit on an advisory board for something that exists in the world that is called it's called the Diagnostics and Statistical Manual for diagnosing mental health disorders, the DSM-5, okay, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 5th edition. If you have not sat on the board that decides what are the definitions of these different conditions, illnesses, and disorders, if you were not a board certified psychologist or psychiatrist or a person of any other person in the mental health disciplines that would sit on the board of people who create the material that gets published in that volume, then you don't have the right to define what mental illness is and what is not. Sorry, that job was already taken by some people who are highly credentialed. It does not come from a person in your family who works in assembly and test inside of an electronics factory. They're not credentialed to decide what is mental illness and what is not. And they are showing their ignorance by not knowing that not all suicide comes from mental illness. And there are people who have absolute diagnosed or undiagnosed symptoms that are not diagnosed yet as a disorder, but people who are diagnosed with disorder and people who are showing symptoms of disorders but not diagnosed yet. We cannot assume that that's the deciding factor. You have a disorder, then if you commit suicide, it was automatically because you have that disorder. It could absolutely happen after an event that is so intolerably painful, humiliating, embarrassing, shaming, just something that makes you feel like you literally cannot do another day with that level of abuse coming at you from your community or your family. If you're expected to keep a secret, if you're expected to live a secret or double life because those around you don't like it, that it gets on them, and that it would shatter their image that they've carefully built, their image of respectability and perfection and superiority and influence, and to be above reproach in all things. Flies in the face of that, and they cannot handle it. And so they have to gaslight you or other people, or perhaps both, wherever they go. They become a gaslighting machine and say, well, that person had to be mentally ill in order to do that, which is a lie. They're perpetuating a false idea, a false premise, and a lie. So I hope this information has helped you today to understand that there's so many different dynamics of suicidality and suicide and all the different factors. But there's one really simple truth that we could all keep in mind, and that is it's entirely possible that the person that you know who either committed suicide or attempted suicide or had vocalized suicidal ideation, that person was possibly reaching for a maladaptive coping mechanism to their trauma. And that they were not a bad person. They were not faulty, bad, broken, shameful, or malfunctioning. They were a human being having an unbearably painful set of experiences, and they didn't know what to do. So what can we do about this? We can give ourselves a steady diet of healthy information. We can spend a little time researching what is the trauma-informed view of suicidality. You'll get a completely different list of dynamics and causes than what you will get in a mainstream mental health, Western medical model of mental health in the United States, or possibly the UK, possibly a few other countries that follow the same medical model as the United States does for mental health care. When we shift and we take our head and we turn our head just one click in a different direction, not a big radical change, nothing like that, just looking straight on, and now we're just this much over, changes our view dramatically. So if we want to understand trauma, we can arm ourselves with information about the trauma-informed perspective of suicide, which is a gentler, less shaming, more caring, more holding heart space, more reaching out to someone and saying, I see you, I hear you, I feel you, you matter, and I care. And I want to help you. And I want to partner with you so that you can bring yourself into a state of well-being where the things that have burdened you for so long can be healed. The wounds that you're carrying inside can be healed. And that might be something that makes all the difference in whether or not you have moments throughout your day where you're a little bit angry at the sun coming up because you had hoped that you could stay in a sleep state for the remainder of your life, that no alarm would ever go off and you would never have awareness of being again. Some of us, when we're asleep, we might not dream and we might just be in that peaceful state where everything's okay for a while. And many people who are experiencers of severe trauma really start to hold a grudge towards the sun for coming up. They crave all day long. They crave when nighttime's here and they can go to just get in the bed, shut down, go to sleep, and it all shuts off for a while. So we can help people to naturally gravitate away from that repetitive thought pattern and that constant seeking of safety that could come just from being asleep, just from having, the phone doesn't ring, or usually it doesn't. Nobody's coming in here. Nobody's coming in this room. I can just let go for a while and stop having it running on a loop in my mind. Whatever were the things that brought me to the feeling of feeling the feelings that I feel. So self-care, steady diet of healthy information, reading books not on suicidality. The most important books I could point you in the direction of are the books about shame, healing shame. There's nothing wrong with reading books about suicidality, but they could reinforce the concept that it's based in mental illness only. It's almost always mental illness. We don't need to reinforce that more, but I'm not saying no one should read books about suicidality. I'm saying if you're interested in that topic, read the books. That's great. But I would be a little bit selective about what is the tone of the book and what is the underlying message in the book. And if it's accepting of the concept of people can commit suicide because of their trauma being so severe that they need a coping mechanism, but unfortunately, it's a coping mechanism that's unhealthy as a behavior of going headlong into addiction or self-harming in some other way, harming others in some way. It's just a maladaptive coping mechanism. What we need very much, the best way, and this is my favorite part of the video, and I want to look right towards you and tell you this. If you think about it, if you think about suicide, there's one person in upstate New York who does not think you're shameful. There is nothing shameful about thinking about that. There's nothing shameful about talking about it with someone. If you can have one attuned, confidential, trustworthy person who holds heart space, can feel and express compassion, can feel and express empathy, a person who does not spend their time injuring other people, but instead spends their time lifting others up in a very, very, very compassionate way, then we have someone who we can turn to with this sort of feeling, this sort of idea, this sort of concern that we have for ourselves. If we don't have someone in our life who can do that for us, there are suicide resources. I already gave the number for the suicide prevention line. And I don't know if I cleared it out of my phone. No, I did not. So again, there is the resource for contacting someone for help. You can call crisis services in your area, or you can call National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. And they have all kinds of people who are trained to listen to you in a supportive way, without judgment, without interruption, without shaming, and without pleading with you or telling you that you're selfish or that there's something wrong with you. They will help. People at crisis services are volunteers. They can help too. There is resource for you. And always, 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 if you're feeling that you're close to that point, call 911. Get that ambulance ride to the emergency room. Don't wait for a friend to come. If you feel it's imminent, do it immediately. Call 911, tell them you're having a suicidal ideation and that you're concerned and you're scared and you need medical attention. You will get that medical attention immediately. And I worked in an emergency room and I dealt with it hundreds of times. When a person comes into the ER and they have that feeling, they are swift, they are confidential, and they get somebody there to help you immediately. And they will put you in the direction of, they'll point you in the direction of the best resources based on what you tell them. And so they are trained professionals, and they're not going to laugh at you, shame you, mock you, insult you, tell you that you are wasting their time. No, they're going to embrace you with compassion and tell you, we have your back. We have this with you. We're not going to turn our back on you. You're with us now and you're safe, and we're going to help you through this. And we're going to help immediately in the best way we know how. So you don't have to worry about it. We're the professionals. We're with you through every step of this. And from there, it gets better. And I have been in that situation. I did not have to go to an emergency room. I went to my doctor's office. It was business hours for my doctor's office. And I went in there and told them how I was feeling. And they asked me, are you willing to go inpatient for a few days so we can get you the help that you feel that you need? And I said, yeah, I'm ready to go. And so I did. And I was there for 10 days. And then I did 3 weeks of outpatient in a different hospital system, 3 weeks of outpatient, what is it called? Partial hospitalization program. And the only way that you could get into that partial hospitalization program is if you had already been hospitalized for a suicide attempt or suicide ideation. And so it was a very safe space. And I'm so glad the program was voluntary, but I agreed to do it. It took 3 weeks of going 5 days a week into classrooms for 4 classes a day. They have 2 in the morning, then you have lunch, and then you have 2 in the afternoon, and then you go home. You go home. But it changed my life. And it helped me to see that all of that was not my fault. Every single coin that was put into that coin bank was a traumatic event, occurrence, circumstances, or condition or environment. And it just got so full. It was so full of incidents and conditions that this person just couldn't function in a healthy way anymore. All of that was just eroded away, and it had to be relearned. And the relearning has been a beautiful process. And so that for me was completed in 2022. I did that work for 2 years. And it was some of the most worthwhile self-care that I could have imagined ever providing for myself. But we save ourselves through one small decision. And that is, from this moment forward, I care how I feel. I now care how I feel. And I've devoted my life's work to helping people like you understand that it is okay to care how we feel. It's essential to everything that we do from that point on afterwards. Changes everything. It's a giant pivot in the direction that we want to go. go towards what? Living the life we want to live, free of the constraints of our trauma, free of abuse, free of the things that hurt us so bad that we didn't want to be here anymore. We can have freedom. It doesn't have to run on a loop in our mind. We can have our life back. And every single one of you and me, every one of us, we're all infinitely worthy of living our best life. We're worthy of being here. We're worthy of having good stuff. We're worthy of doing great stuff. We're worthy of every good thing you could ever possibly imagine being any way related to you. All of it has your name on it already. Trauma recovery has your name on it already. You're moving towards it. If you watch this video, you're moving towards it. And I couldn't be more proud of you. I'm proud of myself too. Very much so. When I say I'm proud of you, I mean it from every cell of my body. Could not be more proud of the decision that you're making to care how you feel. So that you can do what? Be fully engaged in your own life. Loving it. Loving your life. Feeling your worthiness. Feeling joy. Feeling excitement. Feeling anticipation in a good way. And just letting it all come. Just letting it all come to you. All the good stuff just continues to come to you. Through making that one simple decision, I care how I feel. So this has been a really good conversation. Please like, subscribe, and share. Hit the notification bell if you are enjoying the work that I'm doing that you find on my channel. If you enjoy my videos, please put comments in, put in requests for topics for videos. And it would be so, so, so helpful if you would share my channel with others. Put it on social media, any platform you want. Just pick one of my videos and forward it to a platform and give me a recommendation. You can go to my Google page for Lin Bouthillier, CTRC, LLC, and just put in a review for me there, because all of my videos are part of my trauma coaching business. All of it. It's all connected. So it's okay to go ahead and put in a review, even if you haven't had one-on-one certified trauma recovery coaching sessions with me. This is still my work. And if you participated, then it's fine for you to put in a review for my work. I would appreciate it so very much. If you're interested in becoming a client, please give me a call, 716-994-3052. You can find my website, linbouthillier.com, and you can email me at lynn@linbouthillier.com. So I will see you in the next one. Please take beautiful care of yourselves for the rest of the day, because when we do the trauma work, especially on a sensitive topic, a triggering topic like suicidality and suicide, please remember that your system's been through a lot today, and it needs for you to notice what's coming up and then to meet your system's needs with some gentle, loving self-care. I'll see you in the next one. Have the very best day, everyone. Take care. Remember, self-care is never, ever selfish, and that you are infinitely worthy of your own trauma recovery. Bye-bye.